Let's talk about one of history's most world-shaking events, the Black Death. Forget memorizing dates. This was a crisis that made everything else look trivial. In the mid-1300s, a plague swept across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, killing up to 60% of Europe's population. Imagine looking at your three closest friends. Statistically, one or two wouldn't have survived. The culprit? A bacterium called Yersinia pestis, the tiny villain behind the chaos. The most infamous form was the bubonic plague, marked by swollen lymph nodes, buboes that signaled a very bad day. Cities emptied almost overnight, the world was changed forever. But how did it all start? Let's set the scene. The 1340s world was surprisingly connected. Trade routes like the Silk Road linked continents. People, goods, and unfortunately germs traveled far and wide. This global web, meant for prosperity, became the perfect highway for disaster. The stage was set for a microscopic invader to go on a deadly world tour. The Black Death's journey began in the vast grasslands of Central Asia, where the deadly bacterium Yersinia pestis lived quietly in wild rodent populations, largely unnoticed by humans for centuries. But as trade expanded across continents, the bacterium found new opportunities. Fleas, which thrived on the blood of these rodents, jumped to rats that traveled with merchants along the legendary Silk Road. The Silk Road was the superhighway of its day, bustling with merchants, exotic goods, and travelers from distant lands. But now, it also carried a deadly stowaway, one that no one could see. Rats carrying infected fleas journeyed with caravans and ships, weaving the plague's path from the heart of Asia to the shores of the Black Sea, infecting new hosts at every stop. In 1347, the bustling port city of Kaffa became ground zero for Europe's nightmare, as the disease arrived at its gates. According to legend, Mongol besiegers, desperate to break the city's defenses, catapulted plague-infected corpses over the walls, an early and chilling act of biological warfare that spread terror inside. Fearing for their lives, Italian merchants fled by ship, hoping to escape the invisible killer. But the disease had already stowed away with them, hidden in fleas and rats below deck. As these ships docked in Mediterranean ports like Genoa and Sicily, the plague leapt ashore, spreading rapidly inland through bustling cities and quiet villages alike. Rivers, roads, and ancient trade routes became arteries of infection, carrying the disease deeper into the heart of Europe with every passing day. By 1348, Italy, France, and Spain were reeling from the outbreak. Soon after, England, Germany, and Scandinavia fell victim as well, as the plague swept relentlessly across the continent. The plague didn't care about borders, language, or class. It struck down peasants and nobles, city dwellers and villagers, leaving devastation in its wake. Europe had never seen anything move so fast or kill so many. Panic and fear gripped the population as entire communities vanished almost overnight. The world, once vast and disconnected, suddenly felt terrifyingly small as the plague connected distant lands in a chain of suffering. And the devastation was just beginning, as the Black Death continued its relentless march across Europe. Medieval people had no idea about bacteria or germs, so when the plague hit they guessed, and their guesses were wild. The most popular theory? Miasma, bad air. People thought foul-smelling vapors caused the disease. Doctors wore bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, hoping to filter out the poison. Incense burned in homes and streets, and church bells rang to clear the air. Others believed the plague was God's punishment for humanity's sins. This sparked intense religious fervor, prayers, processions, and even self-flagellation. Fear also led to scapegoating. Jewish communities were falsely accused of poisoning wells and faced brutal persecution. Mobs attacked and entire communities were destroyed. In the absence of real answers, fear and blame took over. The real cause, tiny bacteria, remained invisible. Their desperate search for meaning only deepened the tragedy. Sometimes ignorance is as deadly as the disease itself. With no cure in sight, people scrambled to survive, desperate for answers and clinging to any hope they could find. The wealthy fled cities for the countryside, hoping to escape the contagion. They left behind their homes, possessions, and even friends, believing distance was their only protection. The poor, trapped in crowded cities, faced the brunt of the disaster. With nowhere to run, they endured hunger, fear, and the constant threat of illness. Some cities pioneered public health measures. Venice, for example, invented quarantine, forcing ships to wait 40 days before docking. This radical step was a desperate attempt to halt the spread. lazarettos, or plague hospitals, were set up on isolated islands. Daily life collapsed as fear and uncertainty spread faster than the disease itself. Fear ruled, families abandoned the sick, priests avoided last rites, and trust evaporated. The bonds that once held communities together began to unravel. Writer Boccaccio described a world where even family ties broke down, and isolation became the new normal. Yet, amid the chaos, some showed courage. Doctors and priests risked their lives, neighbors helped each other, and new routines emerged to cope with the unknown. People adapted, finding ways to grieve and survive. Rituals changed, but the need for connection and remembrance endured. Even in darkness, humanity's resilience flickered, a small but vital light against overwhelming odds. The social fabric was torn, but not destroyed. Communities slowly began to rebuild, learning from their suffering. The world shrank, but hope persisted. People looked to the future, determined to endure. The Black Death forced society to improvise, invent, and endure. New customs and rules emerged from necessity. It was a crash course in survival, teaching lessons that would echo for generations. And it changed the rules of society forever, leaving a legacy of resilience and adaptation that shaped the world to come. When the worst was over, Europe was transformed. With up to half the population gone, labor was suddenly scarce. Peasants and workers could demand higher wages and better conditions. If one lord refused, another would pay. The old feudal system began to crumble as survivors gained bargaining power. Nobles tried to fight back with laws like England's Statute of Laborers, but the genie was out of the bottle. Peasant revolts erupted and the social order shifted. Cities grew, and a new middle class of merchants and artisans emerged. Social mobility increased. Hard work and luck could now change your status. The rigid three-tiered society blurred, replaced by something more dynamic. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed old systems. It accelerated change, breaking down barriers and opening new opportunities. The world after the plague was more fluid, more open, and more unpredictable. Out of devastation came transformation. The seeds of modern Europe were sown in the ashes of the Black Death. The psychological shock of the Black Death echoed in art and culture, leaving a mark that would last for generations. Artists and writers struggled to make sense of the devastation, channeling their fears and hopes into their work. The dance macabre, skeletons dancing with people of all classes, reminded everyone that death was the great equalizer. No matter your wealth or status, the plague had shown that everyone was vulnerable. Religion was shaken. Some clung to faith, seeking comfort in prayer and ritual, while others questioned the church's power after its failure to stop the plague. Doubt and uncertainty spread alongside grief. This doubt paved the way for later reforms like the Protestant Reformation, as people searched for new answers and spiritual meaning. Survivors embraced life with new intensity. Boccaccio's Decameron captured this live for today's spirit. People gathered to share stories, laughter, and moments of joy, even in the shadow of loss. People spent more on food, clothes, and leisure, determined to enjoy life while they could. Markets bustled with color, and feasts became more lavish, as if to defy the darkness that had passed. The failure of medieval medicine spurred a hunger for new knowledge. Healers and scholars began to question old remedies and seek better understanding of the human body. Universities shifted toward observation and science, slowly moving away from superstition. The seeds of the Renaissance were being planted in these new ways of thinking. The Black Death exposed the limits of old thinking, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths and abandon outdated beliefs. It forced people to look at the world differently, to question, to wonder, and to imagine new possibilities for the future. Out of tragedy came creativity, curiosity, and a drive to understand. Artists, inventors, and thinkers all found new inspiration in the aftermath. The world was darker, but also more alive. Communities rebuilt, and a new energy pulsed through daily life, blending sorrow with hope. The plague changed not just society but the very way people saw life and death, reminding them that every moment was precious and that even in darkness humanity could find meaning and renewal. Why does the Black Death still matter? Because it's a story about us. It shows how fear, misinformation, and blame can spread as fast as any disease. Our interconnected world is still vulnerable. Germs now travel by plane, not caravan. Crises accelerate change, breaking old systems and creating space for new ideas. The Black Death reminds us that even in disaster, humanity adapts and rebuilds. It's a lesson in resilience. People endured, learned, and created a new world. The mistakes and small victories of the past offer wisdom for today. After devastation, there's always a dawn. The Black Death isn't just history, it's a timeless lesson in what it means to be human. And that's why we still tell its story.